MIT from having been head of division at the Jania Institute based within HHM and Ron. We are really delighted to have you here and look forward to what you have to share with us today.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation, and I feel like I've learned a lot in the past hour about all the amazing work that's going on here with the Medical Research Council. So anyway, it's privilege to be here for a couple months in South Africa, and anyway, I hope to build some connections that will continue in the future. So I'm not going to give you my usual science talk, but maybe talk about themes that are perhaps of interest to work that's going on here. I just thought I'd also talk a little bit about my background, which in the informal session we talked a little bit about, but I was at University of California, San Francisco for many years running a lab. For about 30 years, I was supported by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, so I have a long connection. Howard Hughes Medical Institute is probably next to the Wellcome Trust, the biggest biomedical philanthropy. During that time, I've also been involved with biotech and also started a few nonprofit organizations, a couple of which I'll talk about. And then I decided for 5 years to move to Janelia Research Campus as executive director. And now I'm on the short sabbatical because I'm in transition to start a new adventure at MIT, where I will also be doing a lot of work on education. Yeah, so that will be starting in December. Whoops, I have to use this computer since mine isn't working. I thought I'd tell you just in one slide a little bit about some of the research that I did in my lab. Actually, even starting when I was a graduate student. I first became interested in the problem of how material is shipped from one place to the other in the nervous system. And the reason why nervous system and why this is an interesting problem is that the nerve cells, particularly motor neurons in for example, in your body, are the longest dimension cell that you have in your human body. Even from one cell, the cell body of a neuron could be located in your spinal cord, and then it extends a very long process that can be a meter in length, and then the nerve terminal could be innervating a muscle in your toe, for example. So the cell, even though it's microscopic, is a meter long in dimension, probably even longer in a giraffe. And the material, all the building blocks like proteins and lipids are all made in the cell body in your spinal cord. So they have to be shipped over this long distance to reach the nerve terminal. And likewise, there are signals at the nerve terminal that have to be shipped back to the cell body. So it was known that there had to be some kind of transport system inside the nerve that would move this material back and forth. And but at least when I was a graduate student, very little known about the mechanism. But even at the time, microscopy developed from Robert Allen and Shinya Inoue, so that you could see at least what that transport process looks like. So right now you're looking inside of a nerve cell, And it looks like it froze or something. Well, you could see it for a little bit. I had to transfer all this to PowerPoint, so some things may not be working quite right. Anyway, you can see a whole bunch of little particles moving from top to bottom or bottom to top. These big elongated objects that are also moving are mitochondria. And it turns out that this transport of membranes and protein complexes is going on in all cells of your body. The mechanism was not really understood at the time, so that's the problem that I worked on as a graduate student. Fast forward, in trying to answer this question about what the mechanism is for this transport, ended up discovering a new motor protein, which is called kinesin. It works on a track called microtubules, and we ended up also studying this molecular motor protein kinesin for many years. So from the point of view of its X-ray structure, single molecule work, etc., and then come to the year 2000, we had a pretty good understanding of how this molecule actually works as a machine that, just like your cars, it takes chemical energy, in this case from ATP. It then undergoes this elaborate chemical structural choreography that allows the two parts of this motor protein to do this hand-over-hand walking motion and move along the microtubule. You know, we now know a lot about this machine. We know about ones that make sperm move. We know a lot about the machines called myosins that make your heart contract. And I will just say briefly, all that basic science knowledge has actually gone into health benefits as well, including developing small molecules against some of these machines that affect people with a variety of cardiac diseases, for example. I'm happy to talk about that more in any questions, but I'm now going to transition into the other parts I want to talk to you about, which is science education and building science capacity, mainly meaning like training and supporting kind of the next generation of scientists. Mainly in this case from experiences that I've had in India, but I thought both of these themes, you know, might have interest and possible utility for South Africa in the future. So I do want to just say that, you know, a lot of these projects, and we talked about this in the smaller group session, particularly in science education, you know, a lot of the projects that I work on are really thinking of education at a global level, meaning accessibility throughout the whole world. But I also do want to stress that each country, each region also has its local needs and local approaches, and thus these global efforts also have to be really integrated with what is needed and useful in the context of local environment. And that's learning that is also part of the reason why I'm here in South Africa. And just as one example of, you know, kind of a locally inspired education effort, you know, I've been super impressed with this AWASA effort that has come out of IDM in Cape Town, and I had a chance actually to visit their center and, you know, local outreach efforts in the township, and it's like very, very impressive. So that's what you know, you talk about learning, someone mentioned about learning. I think, you know, this combination of really thinking globally, which I think is useful, but also really understanding and learning about what works in different communities is also really essential. You know, this is something that's very motivating to me, really kind of democratizing access to high quality science education. And, you know, I really do think that knowledge itself is a basic global good. And as much as we can do to make it accessible without any barriers, including any kind of financial barriers to access the knowledge, you know, that's the way we should be, you know, advancing knowledge and advancing society. And I think Nelson Mandela, you know, also, you know, had this, you know, beautiful statement about education, which is something I very much believe. You know, in this crazy world which we live in right now, you know, education is kind of the core of what we need to, you know, move forward as a society. And it is both enabling of people's lives, but, you know, education is also like inspiring. It is you know, a great way to live a life. And the more we can make that available to more people, the better. So, you know, in this space, I'll tell you about like 3 projects that I've worked on in terms of democratizing knowledge, you know, all based upon the internet. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the work I want to do at MIT, although that's still very much work in progress. And I was going to do some web demonstrations, but I don't, since it's not working on my computer. Anyway, I think we're going to have to forego that. But if you want to make a note of the websites and then look at them yourselves later, I would encourage you to do that. Okay, so, you know, the first project I started with this is called iBiology. And I want to give you a little bit about the history of why I started that project. And like maybe this is a good example of how you never know what will happen based upon just encounters that happen in your life. And iBiology really started out of my first trip to India. I made lots of trips subsequently to India, but that was in 2005. And I, you know, flew halfway across the world. Even an economy fare is probably like $2,000. And this is the group that I traveled with. Person in the middle is Vijay Raghavan, who runs the National Center for Biological Sciences. And these are some of my colleagues from America. And we came there to give, you know, a symposium to about 150 people at the flagship research institute in India. And it was a great experience, had a wonderful time. It was a great seminar, but then I flew back home after 24 hours of travel, you know, and then I realized that I flew halfway across the world to a country of 1 billion people and talked to 150 people at the most elite institute in India. And, you know, just this awareness that how we communicate science is often, you know, scientists from elite institutions traveling to other elite institutions that had, first of all, the financial means of paying for the airfare or whatever travel costs. And, you know, this system of oral communication was just leaving out a lot of people that don't have access. So, I mean, I gave this example of all the institutions in India that didn't have access to the talks that we gave at NCBS. But this is also true in America, where there are just lots of colleges, lots of community colleges, lots of universities that are just not well resourced enough to hear, you know, seminars from people at the leading edge of science. So I thought, okay, well, we have the internet. Maybe we can actually film seminars and kind of quote unquote democratize the seminar and make them available. So that's how it started. It started with a $2,000 grant. Actually, at that time, from very inspired Ethiopian Haile Debas, who was chancellor at UCSF for a while. That's how I got my $2,000 grant, and started to film people and put it on the seminar. And then it kind of grew step by step, bootstrapped. Got a little more money from HHMI actually, and then NIH. And in the end, we put together a library of about 600 talks, which you can access on the site now. And it took time to build its reputation, but now I'm in Cape Town, or I'm in Istanbul, or I'm in China, or I will run into students who just say, thank you for putting these seminars, because they've been very influential for, whatever, my interest in science or becoming a scientist or whatever. So, more important than just seeing how many views you get on the website, those stories of actually people having access to it and hearing their personal stories of how that influenced them was exactly the motivation, and the realization that it is doing some good, to a variety of people. Okay, this iBiology project has actually kind of expanded in recent years. I've kind of had to step away from it after I joined Genelia, but there are two other people, like my original director that I brought on board has taken it over, and it's now called the Science Communication Lab. I don't know how we get that touch tone enabled thing, but maybe it doesn't matter. So now they're actually making documentaries in addition to these seminar film talks, and the latest one they've done is called The Observer, which kind of shows how science advances through observation. And these are often directed both for students and also for the general public. Okay, we're not going to look at these websites, but you can look at them later if you'd like. At Genelia, I wanted also to do kind of a public information, freely accessible project, at least using some resources at Genelia. And one thing that Genelia is very well known for is images. There are a lot of amazing microscopes at Genelia that take incredible images of cells and tissues and all of these things. And also thought that these images are pretty captivating and artistic and beautiful. I'm sure you've seen these images. The astronomers have done just so much better than us life scientists in making their science accessible through imagery by taking these great pictures of galaxies or Saturn or whatever, and getting people interested in astronomy or space through the images. So I thought, well, we can do that in life sciences too. So that is this other project that I started called Beautiful Biology. So this more recently launched less than a year ago, but that's the goal of this project is take images that just intrigue people just based upon the beauty and the artistic nature of the image, but then have all the accurate and accessible information on the biology behind the image. This project is still, I would say, gaining audience. But anyway, I encourage you to look at it because they're, and you're welcome to use any of these images for whatever might be useful to you too. But they're everything from cells to, insects. It's basically, instead of outer space, like using the invisible biology to teach people about just being interested in science. We're not going to look at that. I can't see that, but what the title is for that. But I want to take you to the next project, and the title of that is Reimagining Biology Undergraduate Education on a Global Scale. So this is a project that I've kind of even personally have taken on in terms of developing and building content for. But it's based upon like two factors of why there's a need to rethink undergraduate education. And I would also add high school, but I decided on undergrad. I think the need is even greater in high school, but high school education is difficult in the United States because it's often controlled by local school boards, hard to break into because it's more like a political system that controls the content. College, educators can make the choice of what they want to teach students. So that's why I thought undergraduate was a better place to start, and maybe it can then percolate into high schools later. But I think, problems, one, I mentioned this earlier, the standard vehicle that is still used in the classroom, maybe not as much, but, many teachers assign or have students buy or read textbooks as part of their coursework. Now, these textbooks that I mentioned can cost like $280. In many cases, there are even ridiculous things happening, like 10, 15-year-old textbooks are being shipped to Africa as, whatever, as an educational offering. I mean, people should have access to the best, most recent, and I will also add in a moment, inspiring information about biology without any cost. So, I very much believe in this, but the other problem with the textbooks is they're just not interesting, quite frankly. I mean, they're just a sea of information. Over the years, more and more information gets stuffed into the textbooks. More and more information gets stuffed into kids' heads who, forget about it anyway after their final exam. And in many cases are coming away with a miserable impression about this, beautiful study of life, and not coming away with how interesting it could be. So, and the other problem is that just learning the information tells you nothing about science. Science itself is the process of deriving new knowledge. It's about exploration. It is about, discovery. And it is about using evidence to make conclusions. That is what science is. And that is fundamentally what I think kids should learn first. Because if they walk away from understanding that as an adult, they'll at least have some understanding of what science is as a discipline. So I do think we need to share the wonder of life, what the scientific process is all about, and kind of the excitement of this, scientific discovery and this amazing time when we are understanding more about what life is about. So my aspirations here are really to start putting forward in undergraduate education an understanding of the scientific process, starting from just asking questions, being a detective, gaining evidence, understanding that evidence, coming to some new conclusion at the end, or hypothesis about how something works. So, just understanding the question asking process and evaluating evidence, I think, is something that like, I speak from the United States, people just need to understand that if they're going to understand the world around them and also how it's changing and what science really is. But this is the other goal, is really just to inspire a curiosity and interest in science. And, well, I'll just be very open here. My view here is that we often teach science as if we're teaching everyone to become somehow professionals in science, like professional scientists, professional doctors, whatever. But most people who take a biology course or science course are not going to end up being in science or in medicine. They're going to have other careers in business or, God knows, the artists, multitude of things you can do with your life. And in humanities, they gave up decades ago about training everyone to become professional novelists or, professional journalists, but all students going to, in liberal arts colleges in America, go through and take humanities courses. And they are outstanding in many cases because they are just trying to teach them about the craft of writing, what it means to read good literature, and come away with some appreciation for this that may have some kind of longer term, impact in their brains and what they want to do and engage with the rest of their life. And I honestly attribute my love of literature to the excellent literature classes that I had in high school and in college. And I don't see why we shouldn't be trying to do this in the sciences as well. Okay, so this is, again, maybe it's going to take 10 years, but this is part of what this freely accessible website is, the Explorer's Guide to Biology, and its signature piece is to really explain great discoveries in biology and the whole path of, how scientists start with an interesting problem, something that was unknown that needed to be studied, and how they went through, again, this detective work of figuring it out, which is the core of what science is. So I can't go through, this site with you too, but it is, so right now there are also discoveries, in many cases, from the discoverers themselves. So I have a lot of Nobel laureates, for example, that contributed their time and their pieces to this project here. So, you can kind of hear about, the story of a great discovery from the discoverer themselves. And in many cases, also learn that there were failures, there were things that didn't work out and had to be overcome. And, so it is also, the whole project is also using like a storytelling style. It's also using, I have a professional artist making all the artwork. So instead of getting, these, sterile scientific illustrations, we're trying to make like science, accessible and interesting and beautiful. Like, why not? And again, it's a story telling style. So this is just one example. Like a lot of high school students and college students learn about a classic experiment done by Messelson and Stahl on DNA replication. Kind of classic textbook material. But so, this is the story of the Messelson and Stahl experiment told by Messelson and Stahl. I'm glad we actually got it because sadly, he was well into his 90s. Frank Stahl passed away this year. But first of all, you can kind of bring out the humanity of like the friendship and, the collegiality that's also part of science, because people think of science as being lonely and, being stuck with a lab coat by yourself and never talking to anyone, or it's done by old people. And, these were two young people that, met, literally over a gin and tonic, and came up with this idea that they were going to solve this DNA replication problem together. So it also has, the real data in the paper, but also the way these stories are constructed is, instead of a textbook where you have to start at, the basic chapter 1, learning about atoms, and then the last chapter chapter 30 gets to something interesting. Here you could pick up any discovery that you want, and we try to make it accessible that you can just pick up that piece and read it. So if you want to learn about how Jennifer Doudna, from Jennifer Doudna's voice, discovered CRISPR engineering, before you read anything else, you can read that piece of work. So anyway, that's what this project is about. Okay, we're not going to see that, but you're welcome to look at it later. And I'm going to bring this entire project to MIT, as well as pieces of iBiology, and also build out new content. So I mentioned this to you. So this is my next stop, reimagining biology education with MIT Open Learning. This is a center at Open Learning devoted to kind of outreach of educational materials. And so I'm in charge of building the biology materials over the next several years. And, I want to make it great. I want to make this the best place to learn biology. I mean, it may take 5 or 10 years, but, okay, hopefully I have enough time in my life to do that, but that's my goal, and to make it accessible and free and useful for places like South Africa in any scope that you see possible. So I understand that the way to do that is, yes, we can have this flagship US place that's producing these resources, but as I said before, it needs to work with local environments for the awareness, the outreach, the feedback, the collaboration, whatever. So, and I'll get to my next part. I'm very motivated to work in the space of India, which is a space that I know very well, but I same here for Africa. So that's one take home from my visit, to build these connections, and I would love further interactions in this space. Just one other thing. This is also going to be a big change in education, which is going to be AI. And MIT is one of the best probably the best academic environment, along with Stanford, for AI right now. So AI is going to be woven into the open learning environment. And of course, companies are working on this too. I think this is largely going to be, there's a lot of issues with AI. But I think in the space of education, I do think it's going to be a good thing. Because, again, for democratizing education, the idea of a tutor was something, again, restricted to the well-resourced. It's something that someone needed money to pay for a tutor, to hire that human being to come and teach that individual. Again, that's just not accessible to everyone. The quality, honestly, of who you hire as a tutor can be very variable in terms of how good they are. Of course, the human interaction, that's a very nice thing. But, I think the ability to use AI to build out personalized learning programs that suit one person different from another, the ability to have curiosity-driven conversations. I use AI all the time, and I find it stimulating for my curiosity, because whatever I come up with next, I can just keep rolling with asking questions. And, so I think it's going to be interesting new times for this. So that's my hope. Next 10 years, more free resources for biology education. So let me get to this next part. Taking a long time, but it took a long time to start. I think this part might be even more useful. So I want to talk about work done in India. And after that first trip of India, I was so intrigued, I went to India for a sabbatical for about 9 months. And, again, I showed this quote from Nelson Mandela, but Nehru, who was, first prime minister, was an incredible scholar and an incredible supporter of science. So he wrote, I think, again, a very inspiring and foresightful quote, which, I wish our current U.S. president might heed. But anyway, it's a very inspiring vision for the country in terms of science. India, historically, had very little money to invest in science. In the 80s, kind of the economic growth of India hit an inflection point and now began to, have more money that it could invest in its own scientific structure. But so when I personally came to India because it was an interesting time when that inflection point was going to happen. But my key observation from being there was you can't build a great scientific nation just on money, infrastructure, and instrumentation. Not that those things are bad, but you also have to focus on the equally important component, which is people. And, this seems obvious, but sometimes we just need to ground in that thought and ask, okay, what do you really need to do to make that happen? So, one of the things, again, in India, and I'm sure here too, is recruiting talent, because a lot of young talent goes abroad to get trained, and recruiting people back to India is like an essential part of, developing, India into, a great scientific country. And then not just recruiting them, but investing in mentorship. And I'll come to that point in a second. And not only then recruiting them back, but really developing a culture of, and this includes everything from the government to senior scientists to administrators, that really values the early career scientists that are brought back to the country. Because, in India, it was very clear that the aspirations of what India wanted to do in science were not going, as a hard statement, were not going to be done by the senior scientists who were there. It was going to require, not that they can't contribute, but it's going to require this next wave of talent moving through. And the other thing is, beyond the money, is that institutional culture of an environment of excellence for science, an environment of mentorship. It's not automatic. That's something, that one actually has to work on building. So, how I got started on this was I went to a dinner. So a group of actually 3 women scientists invited me to a dinner and just said, we'd like some mentoring advice. And so it was a really great dinner. But it really became clear they weren't getting the mentoring that they needed. They were about 4 or 5 years into their independent career. They weren't getting the mentorship that they really needed in their own minds to be, successful in science and also in science in India, which are two related but sometimes separate things. So, then, I came home and I kind of had a sleepless night, and I was thinking about, okay, well, this is a real need, but how do you scale this problem so that, you're not figuring this out institution by institution and could possibly do something at a bigger scale, at least to make headway in a way to mentor and support young scientists. So out of this idea came the Young Investigator meeting, and I'll tell you what this is in a second. Right after that dinner, I came to the head of NCBS and said, I have this idea. And anyway, he supported it. And that, I can talk to you more about that later. That's Vijay Raghavan, who's now, I think, part of or heading the advisory group at Gates. But he said, yeah, let's do it. But the first meeting was a total experiment. No one in India, they're skeptical, didn't know what it was going to be like. So it may have had n equals 1, but it's now in n equals 19. And I was involved in pretty much organizing the first 5. I've kind of stepped away from it, and it has a life of its own now. And that's really important because India has taken ownership of this kind of project. But okay, so what is it? Oops, I think. The slide didn't transfer. Okay, I don't know why that slide didn't transfer. Let me tell you who comes to this meeting. 40 young PIs from throughout India, from research institutes, universities, open to all states across India. 40 postdocs, mostly from the US and Europe, who are Indian, actually open, that you don't have to be Indian, just have to have an interest in coming to India to do your work. Anyway, they are from all over and potentially interested in coming back to India. About 5 international renowned scientists who are also great mentors, about 10 Indian senior scientists, senior renowned mentors, people from government, like DBT, the kind of equivalent, other branches of government, industry, vice chancellors, all come to this meeting. So that's what the meeting is. It's actually, the meeting has become almost, in addition to the main components, almost a gathering point for different branches of life science that don't actually get together in India on other occasions. So the program includes science talks and posters, so there's real science going on there. It's very important. The science talks by the international and the Indian PIs are more like how their science career developed rather than just a complete straight science talk. There are panel discussions on careers and how to succeed in science. There's information on jobs and grants. And there's also, so that's about 3 days. There's a 1-day satellite meeting where institute directors or vice chancellors meet with the 40 postdocs, tell them about their universities. And it's often these one-on-one, there's also a lot of one-on-one or attending posters. There's a lot of networking that goes on in this meeting overall, and that's where a lot of jobs get, developed through this meeting. So, we're now in year 18, but this was just the 10th year anniversary where we did invite, not all of them, but some people have been through past YIMS to come together. And we've gathered a lot of data on that, but it's really been a success story of attracting people back to India, people finding jobs through this meeting, just general networking. The young scientists meet each other and have collaborations. And it's also, I think, just a source of inspiration. People like, you know, science is hard, and like the future of young people in science is hard. And I think just being in this environment where the focus, all the senior people, the government, all their attention is focused on young scientists. And there are harsh discussions about like what is going well and not going well, but the net result, nonetheless, even with all that honesty, is a net kind of inspirational leaving of this meeting. You know, people leave with the meeting. So the last thing I'll tell you about is at that first Young Investigator in 2009, all the postdocs are saying, oh my God, this is so fantastic. We got all this, you know, they're Indian, you know, but they've been away, and they said, you know, we really have no knowledge of what's going on in India. So this meeting was really essential. Another thing, okay, well, that was, you know, 40 postdocs that got invited. What about all the others who, you know, can't invite everyone to this meeting? So we then decided to build what was initially a website, which I was actually personally invested in creating and building all the content for initially, but basically a year-round information portal of everything that happened at the meeting, you know, jobs, you know, science opportunities, grant information, inspiring stories, interviews with scientists, et cetera, et cetera. So it became like a year-round information portal. That now is also in its, well, this is its 17th year. It's actually transformed into a small organization that lives within NCBS. It's staffed by about 6 people. And you know, it organizes this Young Investigator meeting. It has this website, which you're welcome to look at. It's quite rich in information. It sponsors regional networking and training workshops. It does podcasts, articles. It's also a job portal. And it's, you know, it's run by board of directors. It lives within an institute, but it's for all of India. And we're not going to look at it because I can't, but you're welcome to look at it later. And, you know, it has like a collaborative funding model. The DBT, Department of Biotechnology, has invested in India Bioscience and this Young Investigator meeting. So does the Wellcome Trust. Different institutes have also kind of added to the kitty, smaller amounts of money. You know, they get some other funding from industry and foundations. Anyway, you know, the point is that all of what I just described to you does not require a huge sum of money, but it actually makes a big community impact on talent development, you know, in India. Okay. Yeah, so, you know, this is you know, intriguing question is like, could something like this be useful? Since, you know, it's not a hypothetical. There are elements that one can look at in India and possibly say, you know, like, would this be useful to create something like Africa Bioscience or the Africa Young Investigator meeting? And then, you know, at what scale, or what scale initially is, you know, the right level? You know, South Africa, Southern Africa, you know, like, you know, I could imagine like some, even just from being at University of Zambia, I could, you know, imagine like a broader need as well. But anyway, this is the question that I just throw out on the table. And yeah, and if you be interested in, discussing that, or if I could be of help, if it's of any interest. So lastly, I just want to give credit to, again, the one thing I also want to say, just like AWASA, who's run by Anastasia Koch, there are people who are incredibly motivated to do work like this. People that have been trained in the scientific enterprise, do not want to be a practicing scientist running a lab, but want to use their scientific talent to create whatever, just some broader good. And these folks are just jewels, and they do amazing work because they're inspired to do so. And that's why you can do incredible work with a small team of these kinds of individuals. So I'm just highlighting, some of these people who have been involved with these projects. The ones I talked about are highlighted in yellow. But I've also started a nonprofit with Jessica Polka on improving publication practices, which is a whole other topic I could be talking about. Very much involved in advocating for preprints in life science. And Micromanager is an open source microscopy software that is used for controlling microscope robotics and other cameras and things like that. Very useful for Africa because you don't have to pay Zeiss or Nikon or other things exorbitant amount of money to do basic research with microscopy, and that is freely available. So anyway, I've gone a little bit over, but anyway, delight to be here and meet all of you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Ron, for that incredibly inspiring talk. I wonder if there are questions. Monges has got his hand up.
Yeah, no, thanks, Vale. Just, the point that you raised about inspiring curiosity and interest in science, and you referred to the undergrads. And, isn't it a bit too late? Because number science is, you would start at school level. What we've done, we've got a double approach in the MLC. We've got what we call Generation S, which is Generation Science, which is coordinated by our corporate communications under Tendani. So we do not do those typical outreach, go to school. So we bring them here, and they go to our biomedical research innovation platform. They go to our Center for TB Research to learn all those skills and instilling the curiosity among us. Grade 10, from grade 10 to grade 12. So it's almost like a capture. But over and above that, where you will correct me here, is that Center for TB Research, they do not ordinarily go to students. They are in the public phase at one of our sites in Worcester, where they're teaching the community, ordinary communities, DNA extraction. Just to play around with it. So, and then the second phase of our capturing is what Shelley presented earlier on with the CSSFF program. But over and above that, we've added one with the Thermo Fisher, together with the Department of Science Technology. I saw your slide, your second or third slide, last slide, talking about the Department of Biotechnology for India. So here we've got the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, that also part of our collaboration, partnership in some similar setup. And the whole idea about this Thermo Fisher, DSTI, SMLC collaboration is to expand into Africa. So your last question around whether is there something like this for your investigators, I think is quite relevant to what we're doing, and particularly under Thermo Fisher, DSTI, and South African Medical Research Council. And you, earlier on, when you made your comment, you spoke about diplomatic relationships. We are using that diplomatic relationships under the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation to expand into Africa.
Yeah. Well, those are really great and very important comments. And let me make a global statement. I think education is all hands on deck and requires lots of different approaches. And, all together in combination, and including innovative. I think one should think about like education and outreach as a kind of innovation too, where, we have to try new things. So, I think, these local hands-on, see science, feel it, meet someone who's inspiring personally. These are like the most critical ways, I think, of impacting or connecting. And true in my own life too. I went to museums when I was a kid. That's how I got interested in science. In high school, I did a high school science fair project, and I met people through that. So, and I agree with you that K through 12 is like a very important group. I think in terms of education, there are two kinds of resources, and that's a little bit what I said, what you can do locally and what you can do globally. And the two have to cooperate with one another. So locally, yes, you need programs that get kids here and get them exposed to things, or go out to the schools and things like that. Incredibly important. Oftentimes those are like hard to scale to millions of people, but the people that it does reach, it is probably the most impactful way to reach them. So what I am trying to do is and I can't do everything, right? So I have to pick some piece of the education pie and work on that piece and do a good job at that, not to tackle everything in education. So the complementary piece is really just using the internet to reach, possibly millions of people, that students, self-educators, teachers themselves have access to materials that they can either digest in on demand in their own way, or use in a classroom in their own way. So that when they are talking to students, they can use that material and maybe put their own style or influence or whatever, but they have access to these materials, which they can use to help their educational efforts. So I think the bottom line is I think that these things work very complementary. What you can do at very large potential scale through the internet, which is a little less personal, and what you can do in local programs, which becomes very personal and direct. I think these things are kind of work together to, just reach different people in different ways. Did that answer your question or comment or?
We've got a couple of questions online.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll take the final comment question from Johan at the back.
Great. You've actually partially answered this question. Was from Marika Pretorius, and she wanted to know about the open learning courses that you mentioned. I took some pictures because they look really exciting, and I think they'll can also disseminate it through our communications. And her question, and I think you've addressed it, was whether it's targeting educators and or school level learners. And I think sounds to me like your answer is almost both. But I think it would be a very valuable resource for educators as well.
Oh,
as
absolutely. Yeah.
One of the comments that you made that I found very intriguing was around AI and how AI actually can inspire curiosity and help you to think in a bigger way. And I'm sure you've also come across a lot of reluctance in that area and more concern rather than inspiration. And I just would like to hear a little bit more about that and how you feel we can not only take that approach, but also encourage that approach in our institution.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I have a perfect answer for that. I think, like a lot of things with new technology, we're kind of feeling our way about, you know, how to use it in positive ways and being cautious of unintended consequences, which for sure in the AI world in general, there could be a lot of unintended consequences. But, you know, the point is it's here, it's not, we're not going back to a time when it doesn't exist, and we have to deal with the reality of its presence. And I think as educators, part of the responsibility is also even learning how to teach students and educators how to use it responsibly. I think that's almost the biggest challenge right now. I'll just comment a little bit on that. I remember a time like when our daughter was going to school and, you know, the teachers say, don't use Wikipedia, you know, because it's not a reliable resource. I don't think that was helpful because the teachers were using Wikipedia and, you know, and of course the students are using it. I mean, this was a time when, so I think this like defensive thing of purity and, you know, and like pretending that the, you know, younger generation is not going to use these things is like putting blinders on and not looking at the reality of their world and what the world is going to like develop into in 5 years. So, you know, I think instead of pretending it doesn't exist or just putting guardrails and saying you can't use it for this, you can't use it for that, is, you know, acknowledging that it exists and like really thinking about how can we put it to best use in a way that is benefiting humanity, benefiting learning, benefiting curiosity, and at the same time doing responsible teaching of how to use it properly, so that whatever, you don't atrophy your writing skills, which are so valuable for your own personal development, and having people appreciate that. Or how to, you know, do research on prompts or on responses that AI gives to you. I think, you know, that is our challenge right now. And I think that we have to like address that head on, and I would say quickly.
Let's take the final question from Johan.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. We are doing basically the similar thing with your young scientists. This is our 15th year we're running it. So our aim is to focus on our historically disadvantaged universities. So we started very small, but I mean this year I think we have over 90 abstracts, which we can't fit into 2 days. So if you're around, it was nice to meet and see how we can share and maybe how we can link our Prof conference with your young investigators in India. It could be nice to have an international flavor and see how we can cross-fertilize ideas and how we can do it.
Sure, I'd be delighted.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
So what we do is we have it's mostly focused on your historically disadvantaged institutes, but also all other institutes within the country. So you can apply, and it's now virtually. You can do it virtually now. or we're doing it as hybrid now, and we try to your main speakers be your investigators that is now, what you call it, the investigators that's experience. Your experienced investigators, they are now the keynote speakers, so that our younger investigators can learn from them and see where you can go. And then the other speakers is all masters, PhD, and the whole idea behind it when it started off, it was started small in a small boardroom, was for exactly the purpose that you are presenting there now. And I like that idea. If we can merge the two to make it, give it that international flavor, then it would really, we can use that from the end during COVID-19. Can you remember when we couldn't travel? We were teaching online because molecular techniques had to be taught for some of our satellite labs to be able to perform the certain experiments for results that we needed. And what the team at BRIP did, we started to teach these molecular skills online in order for work to continue because we couldn't travel. And that is where that becomes so important. And something else, again, with your HDIs, the problem is the social issue with internet access. And that's what I've experienced a lot. And I work a lot with Walter Sisulu. There we found that they've got a summer school and they would love programs like that. The only problem is internet access sometimes, but if you can give him that as a reading material and then you come in with your teaching, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, great. Well, I don't know what my schedule is after this, but I'm happy personally to talk to you. And also, I said just on the internet, the reason why I came to South Africa, it just shows how life works through one connection to another. But during the pandemic, when I was an executive director of Genelia, I started this Life Science Across the Globe seminar series to unite and have intellectual communication of 8 institutes around the world. So it was Genelia, Cold Spring Harbor, University of Buenos Aires, Laboratory of Molecular Biology at Cambridge, EMBL, NCBS, Peking University, and IDM at the University of Cape Town. So we had this kind of shared pandemic, we're all scientists across the globe, and it was really great for about 2 years, but that's how I ended up, learning at least a little bit about, IDM and UCT and Africa and Vale, and anyway, that's.
Well, we'll take one final comment.
In terms of the high school scenario, we have 2 national competitions. The one is the ESCOM Science Expo, where the scholar has to do a project. And basically it depends a lot on the science teacher, whether they have kids who are going to participate. And then they may approach people at the universities who are working in the topic they're interested in to give them a bit of guidance. But I'm not quite sure how it works in towns where there are no colleges. But that's the one. And then the other one is the Royal Society of South Africa, which is interdisciplinary, all areas of science, holds a high school essay competition annually. And there are 5 topics that sort of cover branches of interest. So there'll be a biological question, there'll be some kind of a physics or chemistry type question, environmental question, a humanities. We make sure they're topics that can catch anybody's interest.
Yeah.
And there again, it depends on the teachers at the school, whether, number one, they know about the initiative.
Yeah.
And whether they will mentor a kid through it. But that is an annual event, and We're actually struggling for funding right now.
That's great. I'll make a really brief comment. You know, I had a great high school counselor. I did a science project in my high school in my basement. She saw that I was interested. She connected me with a local university so I could carry on that project. And then I entered into a competition and, you know, like, which was really interesting because I went to a high school where, you know, it wasn't a great high school. Most kids were not interested in academics, and I didn't know any kids that were interested in science. So just going to this science competition and seeing that there were other kids interested in science was a revelation to me. And, you know, the other thing about, the essay thing, Alan Alda, you may know him. He was Hawkeye in MASH, that TV series, very well known. He's gotten very interested in science communication. He developed something called the Center for Communicating Science at a university, and he sponsors this yearly essay on different topics, but one is like, what is a flame? And, you know, kids have to like write an essay, but write it so that it is understandable. It's not a high level like essay. It's like, how do you communicate in the simplest possible language what a flame is to someone from the general public. So anyway, just to say, like, maybe I'll close by saying I'm partially also doing this college project because that is what MIT is going to be focused on. It is an undergraduate institution. And, you know, that is its core thing. But high school is just, I agree, it's where we, you know, lose a lot of people. And even the MIT students, I'm beginning to, like, a lot of them are super science nerds, of course, that's why they're there at MIT. But there are very few biology majors there. And I think the typical phenotype of the MIT undergraduate, as smart and as nerdy and science focused as they are, they hated biology in high school. They had a bad experience and like decided to go into like engineering, computer science. So just another example of why, you know, we need to have inspirational things for people at that age.
I think that's a very good note to end on. Ron, it remains for me to thank you for this fantastic, stimulating, thought-provoking, and for me, very inspiring engagement. We look forward to keeping this conversation going and to see how we can work closely together, but also to see the fruits of your labor over the coming years at MIT and how the African scientific ecosystem can benefit from that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Parents here, right?
Thank you,